Hello guys, hope everybody is doing well. As I mentioned in my last video, I've been considering different ways to anonymize myself, and ultimately what I came up with is re-uploading my old videos, audio modified now censored, in a compilation format. Instead of just regurgitating old videos, I'll be pausing periodically to interject new information that I think would be helpful to my audience. I also figured that the compilation style would reduce the fraction of videos that are re-uploads. Once I get this out of the way, I can also delve into some more personal details that people have asked me about, such as whether it looks maxes. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. I made this channel to document my limb lengthening journey and also to explain the process to other people who might be considering doing it themselves. First off, a little background on me. My name is Nick. I am 32 years old. I live in the US. I currently work as a I also have a strong background, or educational background, I guess, in math, chemical engineering, and then I also trade currency pairs and indices. I've had 2 limb lengthening procedures, starting with the tibias, and I'm currently finishing up the distraction phase for the femurs. My target is 6.5 centimeters. I'm at about 4.5 right now, and at 1 millimeter a day. That gives me about 20 days left, so the end is in sight here. When I started, I was 5'8.5". I'm currently well over 6 foot, and I will be over 6'1" when I'm done. Really, my goal here is just to break down the process, kind of explain my experience, everything that the process entails, not just the physical aspects, but also the psychological aspects, because those are often overlooked, but it's a very strong component. And allay any common concerns that people have, any questions from the viewers, I'm going to address those too. So that's pretty much it. That's what you can expect in future videos. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out in the form of like a DM through YouTube, or you can just leave me a comment, or I'm also going to include my Instagram in the description. So yeah, until next time. Hello and welcome back. Today I want to talk about the mechanics and physiology behind limb lengthening. Seems like, just from talking to a lot of people, that there are a lot of misconceptions as far as how it works. The only thing that's really agreed upon is that the limbs get longer and in consequence you get taller. But I've had people talk to me and say, oh, you know, like, well, what do you do with the gap? Is there something artificial that's put inside permanently to elongate the bones? And so I was hoping to just address all of those. And so there's no ambiguity, just to tell you how it works. So the foundation for it is this process called distraction osteogenesis. So in this process, osteotomies are created. Those are surgically induced fractures. And then the bone will be stabilized by some form of fixation. This could be internal fixation, like in the case of the precise nail. It could be external fixation, or like in the case of a hybrid method, like the lawn method, which is what I'm using, it's a combination of both. The next step is the distraction stage. In this stage, the bones are slowly pulled apart. Now, as you can imagine, when you have a fracture, the body's naturally going to try to heal. And so it'll try to ossify within that cleft. And what you do here is you slowly pull it apart, not allowing the bone to consolidate. It'll begin to consolidate, begin to heal, you pull it apart. Begin to heal, pull it apart more and more and more. And so you get permanent elongation over time. And that's how distraction osteogenesis works. Interestingly, the same process can be applied to medical procedures outside of limb lengthening, like in the case of a recessed jaw. In that case, you have osteotomies on either side, the jaw is slowly pulled forward, and over time the deformity is corrected. So I said slowly here, but really it's just a single advancement. The cleft then ossifies, or if indicated, I think you can also use a bone graft. So I would say there are 2 components in this process. The first one is the skeletal component. That's the distraction osteogenesis that I just talked about. The second one, though, is the stretching of the soft tissues, and that's one that's often overlooked. Now, you have to consider that while the bones are lengthening, you have things like skin, nervous tissue, muscles, tendons, ligaments. These are all going to have to accommodate this change. Now, you may think, oh, well, why don't you just slow down the rate? And you can to an extent, But if you remember from distraction osteogenesis, when I was talking about that, the bone is trying to consolidate. And if you slow it down too much, it will consolidate early before the desired length is achieved. So you can't have that. So you have this antagonism trying to balance these two factors. And as it turns out, the optimal rate for most people is about 1 millimeter a day. Another thing to bear in mind regarding the distraction stage is the importance of walking and then surgery-specific exercises. Like, for example, and I'll get into more detail in future videos, but in the case of the tibia, you really want to consider the Achilles tendon. And it's very common for people to not stretch adequately, and you can see how mechanically, if that happens, if you don't have sufficient stretching to the Achilles tendon, then the foot is just going to be forced downwards, and you're going to be walking on your toes. And so if you have people who aren't diligent in their exercises, that's going to come through. It's also going to come through in the x-rays, which brings me to the first point again, which is walking.
You'd be astonished to see how many patients remain sedentary. You pay all this money for a surgery, and then you do something that just invites a lot of complications. So don't be one of those people.
The importance of walking is because it stimulates osteoblast activity. It causes the osteoblasts, which are cells in the bone, to deposit bone matrix, and the matrix will then develop into mature bone eventually, but you need to get that stimulation. You can see a big difference in the opacity in x-rays, patients who have walked versus patients who don't walk. So you can kind of gauge how proactive they've been in their physical therapy just based off the x-rays alone because of that stimulation. So the next thing I wanted to show you are some x-rays. These are actually from my tibias. So this first x-ray is immediately post-op. You'll see that there is no height gain at this point, apart from something really minimal, maybe 1 to 2 millimeters from the creation of the osteotomies. The other thing that will stand out to you is that the bones aren't perfectly aligned, and that's something that's going to resolve itself, as you'll see in subsequent x-rays. And then the other thing is that the osteotomies are staggered, which, if you think about it, shouldn't be surprising. So this next x-ray was taken at about 3 centimeters lengthening, and you can see how initially it looks like a big gap, but if you look carefully, especially on the borders, you can see the new bone starting to form there. And this last one here was taken at 5.5 centimeters, which is the final length before removal. Looks like pretty much the same thing, apart from an obvious difference in the gap. Healing is very visible. If you look at the fibula, you can also see it on the tibia, but it's certainly more pronounced on the fibula. So the other thing that I wanted to show you is exactly what the lengthening looks like. And I really didn't know what it looked like. I've had lots of people ask me this, but I took a video just to show you what it looks like on my femurs. And if you recall from earlier, I said that I use the lawn method. It's a really common option just because of price. There are other methods like the precise nail, anything that's exclusively internal, so you don't have any direct physical communication outside the body.
So I included stride here for completeness, but you should be aware that it's been recalled. They found that the components are prone to corrosion, and they also found that because it effectively mitigates the compressive forces, non-union is a common complication. The successor now is Precise Max. I believe that was introduced about a month ago.
Anything like that is going to require like a remote. Typically you place it, in this case it'd be like right above the thigh, and it will communicate with the device via magnets, which is pretty cool. So for these devices, one rotation corresponds to a length difference of 1 millimeter. These are divided into quarter rotations, 4 times a day, once every 6 hours. Another thing to note here is that to keep track of how much you've lengthened, you have to know where you started. And typically it's not going to be at the 0 point. It can, but that's not always the case. So for me, I started at 2.8 centimeters, and this is the left one. It's actually not the same between the left and the right. I think there's like a disparity of like 0.3 cm or something like that. Something pretty small. But anyways, so you can see if you look at the picture, this is at 8.1 centimeters, so you have to subtract that to get a lengthening of 5.3 centimeters. So that's where I am currently, 5.3. So the next thing I want to talk about is time frame. So you have a recommended maximum length of 7 centimeters for the tibias and 8 centimeters for the femurs. And so if you have a fixed rate of 1 millimeter per day, that's easy math. You're looking at a maximum, assuming you don't take any days off, of 70 days for the tibias and 80 for the femur. A lot of people will aim for something lower. I know me for the femur, I'm shooting between 6.5 and 7 centimeters. So, 65 to 70 days. And let me backtrack a little bit here. You actually can take some days off if you feel like you have a little too much tension. It's causing you some discomfort. You can take up to 4 days off consecutively just to give these soft tissues some time to catch up. You don't want to go beyond that because then resuming the lengthening is dangerous. So if you're experiencing anything like severe muscle aches, nerve issues, then it might be recommended to take some time off, but you just want to stay within that constraint of a maximum of 4 days. Now to recover completely, it's going to take between 9 and 18 months. So before that, you don't want to do anything like running, heavy lifting, jumping. All of that's going to be contraindicated until you get verification from an x-ray that your bone is completely healed. Now, what's going to determine the rate are things like age, diet, the amount that you have lengthened. Physical exercise is a big one, if you recall what I was talking about, walking and how that stimulates osteoblast activity. That's also really important. So the last thing I wanted to mention in this video is the company that I use to do this process. And their name is Wannabetaller, and I'm going to include that in the video description. They basically streamlined all the different aspects. They provided transportation, accommodations, they dispensed medication, did x-rays, allowed for easy communication with the physician. Any questions that I had, all that stuff was taken care of, so they made it much, much easier. Now, if you're like me and you're in the US and you did some research, and I'm sure you have if you're considering doing this process, you found out that to do just one surgery, meaning tibias or femurs, it's going to cost about $100,000. And that's excluding the additional recommended like $15,000 to $25,000 just in the case of complications. That's excluding physical therapy, opportunity costs from work, all that stuff. So overall, if you're considering doing both, it's like $250,000. If you're considering just doing one, it's still going to be a lot. It's going to be well over $100,000. So it is expensive. The only way you're actually going to get it to where it's feasible from a cost standpoint is to do it outside of the country, unless you are rich, in which case, good for you. Lucky. I make good money, but not that good. So Wannabetaller is stationed in Turkey, and they provided everything. So I'll go into more details as far as the overall process with them in later videos, but I just wanted to put that out there. Anyway, I hope that was helpful and you took something away. As always, feel free to reach out if you have any questions, if you're curious about undergoing this process yourself and you want to know what the next step is. Let me know. You can send me a DM on YouTube, you can leave me a comment, you can also leave me a DM in my Instagram, which is also included in the video description. I often communicate voice notes there, so it makes it much more expedient, and I always prefer voice notes over text. Also, if you have any content that you'd like to see in future videos, feel free to just leave me a comment and let me know. So, yeah, until next time. Hey, how's it going? Welcome back. A lot of people would ask me about my proportions, and so that's really the purpose of this video. My apologies in taking so long to get it out. Life's kept me pretty busy. Alright, so I had the removal surgery about 3 weeks ago. Before I show you the before and after pictures though, I want to discuss 3, I would call them critical ratios. The first one is legs to torso. I would say that is the most important. The second most important one, I would say, is arm span or quote-unquote wingspan to height. Generally, that's a ratio of 1.
Just an FYI, humerus lengthening is underrated.
Basketball players, it's skewed a little more in favor of arm span, so they'll have really long arms in addition to just being super, super tall. And then the last one, the least important one, I would say, is tibia to femur. And generally, the femur is about 25% longer than the tibia. So a lot of people who are considering limb lengthening surgery think that they're going to gain height at the expense of their proportions. In that idea, though, there's this preconception that normal is a point. Normal isn't a point, normal actually is a range or an interval. If you look at things like height or intelligence, you'll see that they follow a normal distribution. And so you can define normal
Different normal, not the curve. Normal is in what would be common. You could define normal as what would be within one standard deviation either way, or two that would encompass 95% of the population. And you will see that you have some leeway when it comes to adjusting these ratios. So you can modify a ratio and still be within the realm of normal. All right, so I'm going to come back to this in a minute here, but let's take a look at the before and after pictures. So I don't have too many pictures as far as before. I do have a good one that I think I included in the first video. If you just take a look at my legs compared to my body, you can see that my torso is proportionately long for my height. My arms are also very, very long for my height, but it's not too apparent in this photo. That was me at 5'8.5" or 174 centimeters, and now you have me at 6'1" or 185.5 centimeters, possibly a little bit more from gain from the osteotomies. I gained 5.5 centimeters from the tibias and 6 centimeters from the femurs. Originally, I was thinking about doing 6.5 to 7, but I looked in the mirror and I thought that 6 was good, so I stopped there. So my arm span is 71.5 inches, and at 6'1", that's a deviation from my height of 2%, so pretty close to the ideal ratio of 1. Prior to the surgeries, the deviation was 4.4%, so my arms were 4.4% longer than my height, and now they are 2% shorter. So I think that I'm better proportioned, at least in that respect, after the surgeries. I've also got a short video here of me walking so you can better visualize my joints and proportions. This is about 2 weeks post-op. You can see that I can support my body weight, but my stability is not the best, so that's why I'm supporting myself with the walls. You can also see my tibia to femur ratio, and I'm not really going to talk about that too much just because it's pretty much normal. You can see how if you increase both of them equally for a very large number, that ratio is going to converge to 1 as opposed to 1.25 femur to tibia, but I increased the femur by 0.5 cm more than the tibia, and those numbers are pretty small, so I'm pretty much still right smack dab in the middle of normal. So legs to torso ratio is a little bit trickier. I was actually able to find a picture showing different ratios going in increments of standard deviation, and I created a composite image aligning these, so it's visually pretty useful, I think. Alright, so I think just my inspection, it's pretty obvious that I fall within 2 standard deviations as far as leg to torso ratio, but I would like to make it a little more rigorous. So what I'm going to do is take an inseam measurement, compare it against my height, and get a ratio, and then compare it against somebody who's well known, who I think has really well balanced proportions, but a large leg to torso ratio. And this person is, drumroll, 7-time Mr. Olympia Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Austrian Oak. I don't think anybody would criticize him for having proportions that are not aesthetically pleasing. And this is actually something that I had in mind throughout the lengthening process, just for myself as a goal. I thought that if I could land anywhere kind of in the ballpark as far as his legs to torso ratio, then that would be a good thing, and I would be happy. So let's see how I did. So I tried to find a picture of Arnold to where he's standing up straight. That way you can get the most accurate measurements possible. As far as I'm aware, there's nothing posted online, and there's even a lot of uncertainty as far as his height. So his height here, in terms of pixels, is 362, and then his inseam is 175 pixels. So when you divide through, you get 0.48 as far as a ratio. My own inseam I measured to be 36 inches, and then at 6'1", that's 73 inches. So when you divide through, you get 0.49, which is really close, so I'm quite happy about that. So that's it for this video. I'm probably going to make at least one more video about proportions in the future. That way people considering doing limb lengthening surgery will have some sort of idea as far as where they fall with respect to normal, or specifically with respect to mean. What I would like to do is get the data in increments of standard deviation. There's something that's quantifiable, that way people can see exactly where they are with respect to those points. I think that would be really useful. I'm talking about those ratios that I mentioned earlier. Anyway, if you liked the video, please leave a thumbs up, and
Let me know in the comments what you think as far as my proportions. Did I hit the mark, or was I off in some areas? Also, if you have any ideas as far as future content that you'd like to see, I know people have already given me quite a few, and I'm going to start working through that, but you can also make a comment about that too. Well, that's it. Until next time. Peace. Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back. So, I'm making this video to cover alignment and my walking progress. I thought that those topics complemented each other well, so it made sense to include them in the same video. A little background on me, just for those who aren't aware. I did limb lengthening on my tibias first. I gained 5.5 centimeters, and then following a week after removal of the tibial fixators, I did the femurs and gained 6 centimeters there. So together that's 11.5 centimeters, or a little over 4.5 inches, putting my final height at 6'1". So that's where I am right now, and let's get into it. Alright, so I wanted to take a look at some pictures first, and then I will move on to the x-rays. So if we look at this first picture that I have pulled up, just with a cursory glance, symmetry looks pretty good. There are some points that aren't quite symmetric though, and I want to point those out right now. So if you look above my left knee, you will see that there's a little protrusion there. That's actually from scar tissue that developed from the incision that was used to break my femur. So you can compare that muscle contour with the right leg, and it's fairly pronounced. I don't know why that happened. It's doing a lot better right now. It did affect my range of motion, but I'm working through that, and range of motion currently is really good. The other point I wanted to draw your attention to is the right calf. You can see that it's larger than my left calf, and that's because I had a lingering issue from the tibias to where I wasn't able to fully extend my legs. The problem was much more pronounced though on my right side, and so the angle behind the knee was smaller compared to my left. If I was making it as large as possible, trying to get that 180, that full extension. And so the way the body's going to compensate is the heel will elevate and you'll lean forward. You can also just keep it on the ground and reduce the angle between the shin and the top of your foot, but that becomes uncomfortable. So you can see how that would cause stress on the calf, and over time, asymmetric hypertrophy. So this next picture here is just a simple alignment test. We're looking to see contact at the knees and the ankles, and it's just a point of comparison. I included a picture that shows bow-leggedness and knock knees. So it looks pretty good right here. It looks really good, actually. So when it comes to determining alignment from x-rays, I think the easiest way to do it is to get a plane perpendicular to the bone, and then have two different perspectives 90 degrees apart. I'm going to start by looking at the tibias, and unfortunately I'm not going to be able to look at the femurs just because I don't have the x-rays yet. I have asked to get copies of them a few times, but apparently there's some gap in the communication chain, and at the time of making this video I still haven't received them, so kind of stuck there. Alright, so I think it's pretty clear from these x-rays that there is no axial deviation. Everything's aligned pretty much perfectly as far as I can tell. Also, as a point of reference, the plane that I was referring to earlier would appear as a line here, perpendicular to your screen, so I will just show that so it's clear. And now adjusting our perspective 90 degrees, it looks like the proximal end might be slightly displaced forward. It's difficult to tell. It's just not very clear. You can let me know what you think in the comments, but either way, if I look at a side profile view of my leg, I can't really see anything when I'm looking at my shin. There's no like discernible rays or anything. Again, you can let me know what you think in the comments, but this also hasn't affected my range of motion or anything like that. Now let's take a look at the walking videos. Unfortunately, I don't really have any content for my tibias. I took, I think, one video at 5.5 centimeters and then a few pictures, but it's all pretty broken. So for continuity, I'm going to start with the femurs. This first video here is 9 days post-op, and as I recall, I had a really intense physiotherapy session the day prior, so pain is even higher than it would be. You know, baseline is going to be high anyways. You can also see what I was talking about before about how I have difficulty extending my legs, and this is an issue that's since been resolved, but it's very obvious here. Quite a struggle. Yeah, triumph. Look at that. There we go. And this video here is 23 days post-op, You can see I'm very stiff, very slow moving, minimal flexion of the knees. Walking is quite painful. This is 36 days post-op, moving a little bit faster, a little more flexion in the knees, still a very wide stance. This is 12 days after the removal surgery. This is my first day walking without support. You can see obviously very unsteady. I felt like I was really, really heavy, like I weighed 500 pounds. That's what it felt. And then this is 15 days after removal. Stability isn't too great, which is why I'm holding onto the walls. Not really for upward support, but just, again, so I don't fall over or don't waddle too much. And this last one is 27 days, so a little under 1 month after removal. So you can see that I'm able to walk normally for the most part. And actually, at the time of making this video, I can speed walk. I actually feel like I could run, but my bones shouldn't take that. Not until consolidation is complete. Well, that's it for this video. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments and any content you'd like to see in the future. Until next time. Peace. Alright, fun fact. In hindsight, this seems a little conceited, but all of the piano I played myself. This is actually from an Yasha. It's Kyle Landry's arrangement. I put my own twist on it, and it's played on a Yamaha P120, which is one of my favorite keyboards. Hey guys, how's it going? So for this video, I want to talk about pain. One of the most common questions that I've received is, how painful is it? And how does the pain diminish over time? Also, is there anything that I can do to minimize pain? So I'm going to look into those questions and answer them the best that I can. So let's get into it. I'm going to start by talking about the tibias through the lawn method, and then I'm going to expand to include the femurs and other methods. So I think it's important to keep in mind that I'm talking about something very subjective. Pain is very subjective, and so when I mentioned that I may have experienced something like a pain level of 7 on a 1 to 10 scale, that might be somebody else's 8 or somebody else's 6 or 5, so just bear that in mind. The other thing is that this graph encompasses the time from immediately post-op, when the anesthesia wears off, to the end of the lengthening. Looking far left, no surprise, we have the maximum once the anesthesia wears off. For me, with the tibias, this was about 9, and for the femurs, it was about a 7 initially. And the reason for the discrepancy is that I actually had different painkillers. For the femurs, I received an opioid-based painkiller. I can't recall exactly what it was, just because I wasn't super inquisitive at the time. I wasn't feeling too good. For the tibias, I received tramadol. Tramadol is like an intermediate strength painkiller. Obviously, the regimen is going to be up to the physician, but I would expect most people to experience something similar to what I had with the femurs. So this period of high intensity pain lasts for about 3 days. After that, the next milestone occurs at about 3 weeks. At that point, the pain level drops to a manageable level, whereas before it's pretty intense. I'm not going to lie, especially for the femurs, it was quite awful, but it's tolerable after about 3 weeks. You might expect for pain to be constantly decreasing, but as you can see from the graph, there's actually a minimum, and that comes from the stretching of the soft tissues. So initially, while you're elongating the bone, you don't have any pain from stretching the muscles because it's really minor. But as you approach, typically around 4 centimeters, it's a little bit more for the femurs, but at around 4 cm for the tibias, you will begin to experience some muscle aches, and then later possibly some nerve pain too. So when it comes to muscle pains, there are 2 ways you can combat that. The first one is preemptive, and it's stretching at least 1 month prior to the surgery date. And the second one is aggressive physiotherapy throughout the lengthening phase. So that's going to primarily consist of more stretching. So as you can see, stretching is really important. When it comes to the nerve issues, I would suggest taking vitamin B12. It's often prescribed just as part of the normal supplement regimen, but if not, I would just pick it up. It's really cheap. The pain that you can expect to experience after the minimum really depends on your preparation, so you're stretching before the surgery, and then also the amount lengthened.
So for me, it wasn't too bad. My lengthening was fairly conservative. I only did 5.5 cm for the tibias and 6 centimeters for the femurs. But having spoken with quite a few patients who lengthen more towards the maximum, the nerve pain especially can get pretty severe from what I've heard. Alright, so next we will take a look at the femurs through the Lawn method. You'll see that overall it's very similar to the tibias with the Lawn method. The initial pain level is higher. I know I said that my experience was the opposite, but I would attribute that to the difference in painkillers. The femurs are more painful than the tibias, unequivocally, so trust me on that one. You'll notice that the minimum is shifted to the right compared to the tibias, and that's because the soft tissues of the upper leg stretch more easily than the lower leg. Lastly, we will look at internal methods. Now, as I said before, I use the Lawn method, so this is a little speculative. I can tell you, though, that a lot of the pain, especially with the femurs, was due to the pin site, so I can imagine what it would be like if you eliminated that. The graphs are basically going to be the same, except shifted down. This is a little bit different in the case of the tibias because after about, I would say, 4 centimeters, you really don't have any pin site pain. Again, contrast this with the femurs, where pin site pain is constant. So you'll notice that the two graphs converge when you're talking about the tibias for the Lawn method and internal method. So now, having spoken with other patients who have tried different methods and contrasting our experiences, if I had to go back and rebake this graph, it would be the same thing in terms of general behavior, but if you look far left at the vertical axis and the gap between femurs LON and femurs internal, I'd make that gap bigger. So you do have some things that are the same between the different methods, like the pain from intramedullary reaming, but in the case of the femur specifically, the pain from the pin sites is pretty significant. So again, just there's a good sized gap there. Alright, so I just talked about the baseline pain, which is shown in the graph, but obviously if you could increase the resolution, basically you could think of it as resolution, there would be some spikiness that would probably be due to movement and other factors, so I wanted to spend a little time talking about that because it's worth bringing up. So as I said before, the femurs are more painful than the tibias, and that's partly due to your ability to isolate the tibias, whereas with the femurs, you're sitting on your injury. When you go to the bathroom, there's a good chance that you're going to be, again, sitting on your injury. The soft tissue thickness is also greater for the femurs, so that definitely comes into play, and I think that's the reason why you have consistent pin site pain throughout the lengthening process in contrast to the tibias, where that diminishes and pretty much is absent for the second half. Regardless of the method and whether it's the tibias or the femurs, the amplitude of the spikes and the frequency will go down over time. Well, that's all I have for this video. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and if you want to have a more in-depth conversation, feel free to reach out to me on my Instagram. It'll be in the video description. Until next time. Alright, so that's it. At least for this segment. There are going to be more, of course. I'm going to go through all my old videos and anonymize them. Please let me know what you think in the comments. It did take a lot of effort to put this together. I promise you that it was painstakingly slow. It took much more time and effort than I'd hoped. It was very, very long, but anyways, let me know what your thoughts are. Also hoping that the audio quality is better. It seems to be, going back over my old content. There's less ambient noise, the conditions are better. I did my best to improve things. Anyways, till next time.